So we've got quite a story today, don't we? A lot has happened since the glory days of King Solomon, and not much that happened is particularly good. The kingdom has split in two. So now we have the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called Judah. And neither kingdom has been what we might call, have what we might call faithful and stellar leaders. Both kingdoms are on this downward spiral that will lead to their eventual demise. And today's story is set in the northern kingdom in Israel, where the kings have done whatever it takes to retain power, which means they have incorporated a strategy of marrying the daughters of foreign leaders and bringing in with them that security that comes from having your allies being related to potential enemies who are now your allies. But it also meant that they brought in the daughters of the pharaohs brought in their own religions and relegated the God of Israel to the back burner. And Elijah is compelled to speak for and act on behalf of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham and Sarah, the God of Isaac and Jacob, the God who parted the waters for Moses, the God who provided in the wilderness, the God who led them to the promised land. And that's the God that Elijah was compelled to speak for and on behalf of. And Elisha, as we saw, is right by his side, watching and learning. Elisha is in awe of the ways that Elijah draws on God's power and strength to perform miracles on behalf of the poor. Elisha is in awe of Elijah's trust in God to provide and protect. He's in awe of Elijah's courage to speak the hard truths to the powers that be, even when it endangers his life. And Elisha loves Elijah as a close friend and mentor and father figure in the best sense of the word. No wonder, then, when it comes to that tender time for Elijah to cross over that thin line between heaven and earth, when that happens, no wonder Elisha refuses to leave his side. As we heard a few minutes ago, when the scripture says, over and over and over, Elisha says to Elijah, "I will not leave your side." Even when others try to tell Elisha that the time of Elijah's departure is near, Elisha says, "I know, but be quiet," as if to say, I don't want to dwell on what is to come, but I want to hold on to what I have right now. Maybe you know what that's like. Those final, precious moments with a loved one, when all you want to do is remain with them in that moment. Whether in body or in spirit, it doesn't matter. Remain by their side always. That's all Elisha wanted to do, to hold on to Elijah and his courage and his faith and his power and his God, and to remain there with him. So when the time of crossing over that metaphoric river of life, when that time came, it was Elijah who had to name that reality to Elisha. It was Elijah who had to name the fact that the parting time was near. And it was Elijah who gave Elisha permission to let go and carry on with life on this side of the river. He says to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I go." Now, I can imagine Elisha wanting to say to his mentor the same thing he said to the others. Be quiet, I don't want to talk about it, Elijah. But deep down, Elisha knew that indeed that time had come. And so, because he knew that he couldn't physically follow Elijah to the place where he was being taken, he could at least ask for Elisha's spirit to remain there with him. So that's what he did. He asked for double of Elijah's spirit, double the courage, double strength, double fortitude, double vision, double the power, double the faith, double the generosity, because he knew that life without his mentor Elijah would be challenging and hard. And so we asked for what he needed. Kind of like we remember how last week Solomon asked God for what he needed to rule. But here's the thing. Elisha's request wasn't just for him. It wasn't just for him to help him deal with his own grief and loss. Nor was Elisha's request about one-upping Elijah, about establishing his own legacy in order to be recognized as the greatest prophet in history. No. Elisha asked for double of Elijah's spirit so that he could continue to carry out that challenging prophetic ministry that God had placed upon Elijah, so that he could preach the hard truth to those in power, so that he could care for the poor, so he could trust in God's generosity, proclaim the presence and power and provision of the mighty power of the great I Am over all of life. That's why Elisha asked for Elijah's spirit. He asked for double because he wanted first and foremost to be able to carry on in Elijah's footsteps. And they were mighty big shoes to fill, but Elisha wanted to fill them, wanted to build upon what he had learned from his master teacher, wanted to honor that great legacy of courage and generosity and faith he had received from his mentor and father figure and friend. And so Elisha asked for what he needed to do just that. And as we heard the story unfold a few minutes ago, just after he asked for double of Elijah's spirit, Elisha watched as Elijah was carried away in a whirlwind. All Elijah left behind was his cloak. Or at least that's what Elisha thought at the time. So Elisha picks up that cloak and calls out to God, "Where are you, God?" And in that call to God, I hear a mixture of human expression, that human expression of grief and anger and trust and perhaps even gratitude. And he expresses this and takes that cloak and throws it into the water and watches as the water parts, just as it had parted for his beloved Elijah. And as Elisha crosses back over that dry bed of the Jordan, he and everyone gathered there at the river is fully aware that Elisha has received much more than Elijah's cloak. He has received Elijah's spirit doubled. And I've got to believe that in that moment, Elisha came to know this profound truth, and I want you to know it too. It is this: even though on this side of the river You can't remain forever with a loved one. Your loved one remains with you as you model your life after the best parts of theirs, as you emulate those aspects of their spirit that are worthy of remembrance and celebration, and as you trust in God's power and presence to connect you in ways that are beyond all knowing. Yes, your loved ones can and do remain with you, and even remain through you as you find ways to pick up where they left off and continue their life's passion and work and honor their legacy and give thanks to God for the spiritual gifts that they embodied. That's what Elisha did when he threw that cloak into the river, and like Elijah, trusted God to part the waters. That's what Elisha continued to do for the rest of his life as he allowed Elijah's spirit, actually God's spirit in Elijah, to guide and direct and shape his thoughts and his actions and his life. It was a divine spirit of compassion that allowed him to purify water so that people could drink it without falling deathly ill, and a divine spirit of power that led him to raise a boy from the dead. Read about it in 2 Kings. It was a divine spirit of generosity that empowered him to help a poor widow pay off her debts, and provide for her family. And it was a spirit of abundance that enabled him to feed hundreds of men with just a couple of loaves of bread. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It was a divine spirit of courage that strengthened Elisha to confront the powers that be with the hard truth of their unjust rule. And it was a spirit of inclusivity that compelled him to heal, yes, an outsider, and that years later served as inspiration and guide to another young prophet named Jesus. Yes, it was a spirit of God that lived and moved and connected Elijah and Elisha in ways beyond our knowing. And here's the thing, the more Elisha remembered and honored and carried out Elijah's great legacy with his own life, the more Elijah's spirit remained alive and well and life-giving in this world, and the more God's desire for this world gained momentum among God's people, to the point where people still remembered and honored Elijah's legacy 850 years later when John the Baptist and Jesus arrived on the scene. The truth is that the more we remember, the more we honor, the more we live out the legacy of those who have impacted us and this world in positive ways, the more they and their life-giving spirit will remain with us in very real and very powerful ways. And the more we will become aware of God's abiding presence and power in all of life. So that's what we're going to do today. On this All Saints' Day, we are going to remember and honor and celebrate and give thanks to God for the lives and legacies of the saints of this church, the saints of our own lives, and the saints who over time and eternity have made this world more loving and peaceful and just. In just a moment, we will light candles, and with great gratitude say the names of the saints of this congregation who have gone before us in the past year. You will remember well the names of some of these saints, while others may not be familiar to you. I encourage you to offer a prayer of gratitude as each name is spoken. And I ask you, as you are able, to lift up within your heart any particular aspect of their life and their spirit that remains with you on this day. And then, like Elisha, carry on their life-giving spirit with you into the world, for the sake of the world, trusting that God is with you and all the saints. And next, I'm going to invite you to do the same and lift up prayers for those saints in your life, whether living or departed, and name out loud someone for whom you give thanks, someone who made a difference in your life, someone whose life and legacy you want to celebrate and emulate and honor with your own life. Don't be afraid to say their names out loud when I invite you, because hearing them will bless all of us and will remind us that we are all surrounded by God's saints. And then we'll move into a time of prayer and music. So now, with thanksgiving, let us honor the lives and legacies of our saints. Koji Abe. Marjorie Blewett. Roger Heimer. Phyllis Mangan. Amy Robinson. Bill Vanderreet. Billy Yost. Zoe Jordan. We give thanks for these lives and for their spirit that remains with us.